Westward the Empire has been made possible with major funding from the Gilbert M. and Martha H. Hitchcock Foundation, with support from First National Bank of Omaha, Intercom Corporation, and the Trans-Mississippi Exposition Centennial Celebration, and additional support from the Alan and Marcia Baer Family Charitable Trust, the Ada and Leon Millard Foundation, the Cooper Foundation, Werner Enterprises, the Architectural Foundation of Nebraska, and the AIA College of Fellows.
The Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition has been projected as a demonstration of the marvelous resources of the Great West. In grateful recognition of that spirit of progress which, in the brief period of a half-century, has transformed a wilderness into 24 states and territories. Gurdon Wattles.
They regarded World's Fairs as educational, as ways to persuade people about the way the world should be seen and understood.
And so Trans-Mississippi, if you just look at the term, across the Mississippi, that was celebrating the settling of the West. We were dusting ourselves off, patting ourselves on the back and saying, congratulations, job's done, now let's get on with the industrial age.
People were thirsting for knowledge. They wanted to know what was going on in the world, and this gave the opportunity for companies and cities and states the opportunity to show what was going on in their part of the world.
The World's Fairs suggested, at least in part, that the United States could take the lead in civilizing the rest of the world.
During the summer and fall of 1898, millions of Americans witnessed or read about the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition, a World's Fair held in Omaha, Nebraska. This event highlighted the progress of Western civilization and displayed the American West to the nation. Late 19th century America was changing as never before. The West was one. The buffalo were vanishing. Indians now lived on reservations. Railroads crossed the country. The West was no longer called the Great American Desert. Some Americans wanted to expand their borders. The United States had acquired Cuba, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines. The war with Spain proved the nation could be a global power. Immigrants poured into growing cities. Industrial machines came to both farm and factory, changing work, increasing the pace, and expanding the scale. During the 1880s, America grew dramatically, but it would not last. In the 1890s, the economy slowed. Farmers struggled with drought. Banks failed. In this crisis, World's Fairs took on a new importance. A great era of fairs began that lasted until the dawn of the First World War. Fairs highlighted industrial progress. They showcased new goods. Fairs revitalized the host city's economy. And for those who attended, they saw their past and future in a new way. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert opened the Crystal Palace Exposition in Hyde Park. It marked the first World's Fair of the Industrial Revolution. Never before had the world witnessed an event on such scale. Housed in an elaborate building made of glass, it highlighted England's prosperity and global power, and the beginning of an era of grand World's Fairs. "25 years later, the United States would celebrate its first 100 years of independence and mark the end of the Civil War era with a World's Fair. It would be called the Centennial International Exhibition. Buildings were constructed which highlighted machinery, agriculture, and government. The fair attracted nearly 10 million visitors. The world's Columbian Exposition became the fair by which others would be measured. It celebrated 400 years of progress since Columbus's voyage to the New World. Located on the shores of Lake Michigan, the fair attracted over 20 million visitors. Embracing a new, dramatic look with its classically styled buildings, it became known as the White City.
Great crowds flocked toward the exposition grounds, making a continuous stream of humanity that surged in one great unbroken wave, only to divide around the magnificent structures that proudly lifted their ivory proportions skyward. A dream city was before them. Daniel B. Shep.
The Chicago World's Fair really did look to the East Coast. It was about New York architects and about urbanity and the importance of the major cities. And I think there was a nice chunk of people who felt that it was a direct thumbing of a nose at the American West, and that people out in the American West, especially people in Nebraska that are economically and culturally tied to places like Chicago, took that insult personally.
One of the most financially successful aspects of the fair was its Midway Plaisance, a collection of amusements, sideshows, and displays of people from around the world. Yet while the Chicago Fair featured the prosperity of the country, the nation's economy was collapsing.
In 1893, the bottom fell out of the American economy. They were living in the midst of their Great Depression. And the World's Fairs that followed in the wake of the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition were part of an effort to restore faith, A, in the economy, B, in America's national future.
Others, seeing the success of the Chicago Fair, saw the same chance for economic opportunity for their cities.
San Francisco in 1894 essentially was a microcosmic copy of the Chicago Fair. Then came the series of fairs in the American South, the Atlanta Fair in 1895, the Nashville Fair in 1897, and these fairs really gave the Omaha exposition promoters a sense of hope that they too could join in this movement, even though they didn't have a population base that was on the same scale as, say, Chicago or St. Louis later.
We believe that an exposition of all the products, industries, and civilization of the states west of the Mississippi River, made at some central gateway where the world can behold the wonderful capabilities of these great wealth-producing states, would be of great value, not only to the Trans-Mississippi states, but to all the home-seekers of the world. William Jennings Bryan.
Bryan saw Omaha, Nebraska, the fourth largest city west of the Missouri River, as that gateway to the West. He introduced a resolution at the Trans-Mississippi Commercial Congress in 1895 to host a World's Fair in Omaha during the summer and fall of 1898.
If you were going to have a fair in the western part of the United States that was going to focus on the West, Omaha would be a very logical place to have it because it was a jumping off place for the West. A lot of people would come to Omaha and pass through Omaha on their way to various areas of the West for settling.
The city of Omaha was founded in 1854 as the Nebraska Territory was opened for settlement. Located on the Missouri River, it was a logical starting point for those headed west. By the 1860s, the booming river town became a rail center as the Union Pacific Railroad laid its tracks through the west. With the strength of the railroad, the city grew into a livestock and wholesaling center by the 1880s. Yet Omaha's fortunes, as did the nation's, struggled in the 90s. Leaders felt the fair would make a difference. In January of 1896, the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition Corporation was founded. The challenge was to raise funds for the exposition in the midst of a depression. Exposition president and banker Gurdon Wattles and the board of directors took on the task of raising the money. Corporations, railroads, business leaders, and local, state, and federal governments all contributed money for the construction of the exposition.
The people who invested in World's Fairs and sponsored them did so in part because they wanted to build civic centers, a sense of community. And there's no reason to downplay that. At the same time, they were shrewd business people. They wanted to make money. But even this doesn't explain their enthusiasm for the World's Fair projects in Omaha and other places. They regarded World's Fairs as educational, as ways to persuade people about the way the world should be seen and understood.
Every good square trades unionist, every employed man and woman in Omaha, South Omaha, and Council Bluffs should buy at least one share of stock in the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition Company. The success of this great enterprise means spring chicken, fried potatoes, and blackberries for us all. The Western Laborer.
In the end, over 6,000 individuals bought shares of stock in the exposition for as little as $10. The construction and planning of the exposition was a massive undertaking. On land north of the city, between 16th and 24th Streets, real estate developer and exposition board member Herman Kuntz donated land which would be used as the site of the fair. Omaha architect Thomas Rogers Kimball and his partner C. Howard Walker were hired as architects-in-chief. Taking their lead from the recent 1893 Chicago Fair, the buildings were designed in the classical style.
When we talk about the architecture of the Omaha Fair, it was really at that time period the cutting edge in architectural design in the United States. The classical period of the classical revival and the Renaissance revival period in architecture was at that time very important in what was going on. It was considered forward-looking. This was going to be the architecture that was going to be preeminent in the United States.
Kimball and Walker set forth a plan of 3 main areas of the grounds. The Grand Court, containing the main exposition buildings and lagoon. The Bluff Tract, with its state buildings. And the Midway. Construction began in the spring of 1897.
The detail of an exposition is inconceivable. In this case, the entire space of 160 acres has to be graded, a lagoon to contain over 7 million gallons excavated, at least 10 large buildings built, and an army of architects, painters, sculptors, engineers, draftsmen, and laborers controlled and kept busy. See Howard Walker.
While the buildings looked grand, they were not meant to last. They were constructed of a simple wood frame and then covered with staff, a mixture of plaster of Paris and hemp fiber. Over 5,000 men worked on the construction, including 1,500 carpenters. 14,000 trees, shrubs, and bushes helped transform the 184 acres into a magical white city. February 15, 1898. The United States battleship Maine blows up in Havana Harbor. While the cause of the explosion was uncertain, war with Spain seemed imminent. On April 24th, the United States Congress declares war on Spain, with a goal to liberate both Cuba and the Philippine Islands from Spanish colonial rule. It would be a war that would have a dramatic impact on the soon-to-be-opened Exposition in Omaha. On June 1st, 1898, the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition opened its gates. One writer called it a little city of the beautiful.
The Exposition has become the instrument of civilization. Being a concomitant to empire, westward it takes its way. The Crystal Palace, the Centennial, the World's Fair, the Trans-Mississippi Exposition. John Baldwin.
At the time the Louisiana territories were acquired by the United States of America, people like Jefferson were projecting that it was going to take hundreds, if not thousands of years to settle that vast piece of real estate. And so Trans-Mississippi, if you just look at the term, across the Mississippi, that was celebrating the settling of the West. We were dusting ourselves off, patting ourselves on the back and saying, congratulations, job's done, now let's get on with the industrial age.
50 years ago, the larger part of the country west of the Mississippi River was unorganized territory. Its arid plains and unexplored mountains were occupied by savage tribes, and their herds of antelope and buffalo roamed unmolested by the white man. Gurdon Wattles.
Opening day drew nearly 28,000 visitors to the fairgrounds. Speeches of the day spotlighted the promise and progress of Omaha and the West. The fair was more than just the buildings. It was an attempt to show visitors the world. Unquestionably, the focus of the fair was the Grand Court. Its buildings symbolized permanence and importance.
Fairgoers see only that the buildings are a blinding, dazzling mass of white. I have seen men stand stupefied, blinded as they would have been by a flash of lightning. Harper's Weekly.
World's fairs are always designed as special spaces, as places that are walled off and a little bit separate from the rest of the world that they're put down within. That means that there's the possibility of making something that's utopian, a world apart, a world that represents the future, a world that's more perfect, better designed, clean, organized, a world which is very desirable.
The use of the fair was initially developed so that it could become a place where people in the United States or in the region could see what was happening not only in the United States, but as well as worldwide. And for that reason, it was a wonderful opportunity for people to have a window on the world for the first time.
The Trans-Mississippi showcased the latest technology and products. Electric generators, minerals from the Southwest, grains from Minnesota, art from Europe, and the newest farm implements. In its lagoon, you could climb aboard a giant swan boat or ride in a Venetian gondola imported from the recent Nashville Exposition.
What the West typically sought to do was to develop in its midst the best of the Eastern and European traditions. So the West saw itself not as a departure from the mainstream of European American civilization, but hopefully the fulfillment of it.
At the west end of the lagoon was a large pool and fountain, reflecting the 500-foot-long United States government building. With its gold leaf dome, it stood as the most prominent building at the Exposition.
America's image in the 19th century was very much focused on government, politics, the military. Patriotism was very high at this time. We had a lot of buildings, a lot of exhibits that brought that forth. Nationalism was very, very strong, and certainly regardless of the international context to it, America was shouting about what was good about it.
Just to the east of the government building was the Fine Arts Building. Originally intended to remain after the fair closed, it was actually two separate buildings connected by a courtyard.
In all, some 700 pieces were hung on the walls, and while many people did not understand and failed to appreciate the opportunities given them in the shape of a great exhibition, it was the universal verdict of those people who had made art a study that the exhibition was a notable one. Armin Griffith.
At this particular time, the end of the 19th century, there really wasn't a desire, even on the part of the most sophisticated of art buyers or connoisseurs, for the kind of revolutionary abstraction and shocking quality that would come in the 19-teens. So the art on display would be inspirational, sublime, harmonious, giving you a sense of uplift above the mundane.
At the east end of the Grand Court, with its distinctive entrance, stood the Mines and Mining Building. It contained exhibits from 25 states and territories.
It was the West that had the gold mines, the silver mines, the copper mines, the lead mines, and therefore there would be a building to bring attention to this great wealth of natural resource that could be found by Eastern investors who could take a profit and benefit the whole national populace by involving themselves in the activity of Western states.
Thousands of medals and diplomas were awarded in numerous competitions. It became a way for manufacturers and states to promote their products.
People were thirsting for knowledge. They wanted to know what was going on in the world, and this gave the opportunity for companies and cities and states an opportunity to show what was going on in their part of the world itself. It became it was an advertising atmosphere. And the companies that came there that were the exhibitors, their purpose was to show their products and what they had to offer.
At the east end of the Grand Court, beyond the twin restaurant towers, was the Bluff Tract. An open plaza and bandstand for concerts and speeches was located at the north end of the Bluff Tract. To the south was the elaborate horticulture building. It contained large displays of fresh fruits, vegetables, and plants. Between the plaza and the horticulture building, 9 states erected buildings. The most unique structures on the Bluff Tract were the 7-story wigwam built by neighboring Pottawatomie County, Iowa, and the Minnesota State Building, constructed entirely of pine logs. Admission to the fair was 50 cents for adults, 25 cents for children, in a day when the average working wage was just over $3 per day. With food, souvenirs, and all the midway attractions being extra.
In view of the fact that the working classes are expected to constitute a considerable portion of the Sunday audience, due to reduced admission, the bulk of the program will be selections not above the musical understandings of the ordinary individual. The Omaha Sunday Bee.
The discounted admission boosted the usually slow Sunday attendance. Exposition officials felt it would attract people who might not otherwise visit the fair.
There was a panic in 1873, a nationwide railroad strike in 1877. There was the Haymarket affair in Chicago in the mid-1880s. This was a time of horrific violence in many, many ways, and it was a source of great concern. The World's Fairs were intended to respond to this kind of conflict by posing a view of harmonious class interests, that we're all in this together.
Expositions bring a more valuable lesson in spreading the idea of democracy than in any other way, helping us loosen the sense of class consciousness that has divided us into sects and factions. We learn through efforts like these in Omaha that we are truly one people. Samuel Jones.
One of the crowning features of this exposition, and one which has exceeded all other expositions in the world's history, has been its electrical effects. The buildings and exhibits will fade in memory, but who can ever forget the inspiration and impressions produced by the illuminations, which at night glorified each turret, spire, and dome. John Wakefield.
The Trans-Mississippi Exposition set a new standard with its electrical displays. Every night, thousands of incandescent bulbs were illuminated, outlining the buildings of the Grand Court. It was the new innovation of the day, in a world where little was electrified.
Turning on the lights at the fairground was a special event. People came at dusk and stood on the great courtyard and waited for the darkness to become complete, and at the appointed moment, the lights began to come on in a prescribed sequence. A spectacular moment was at hand. And the popular accounts that we have of this is that people fell completely silent.
It was magnificent beyond comparison or comment, and the immense crowd that had been waiting patiently for the moment gazed in dumb admiration. For a few seconds, the vast court was as silent as though it was peopled with wax figures. The Omaha World Herald.
It was an exciting prospect. The idea that you could walk around at night and have so much light available that you could really not just see where you were going, but see all the buildings clearly. So if you came to this exposition as a farmer or as a person living in a small town, you literally saw on that night that you arrived more light than you had seen anywhere in your whole life before then.
Of course, there will be a midway, and it'll be the busiest, merriest, and most crowded spot on the grounds. Of course, there will be music and laughter and pretty girls. Such pretty girls. Languid Oriental beauties and bewitching Parisian coquettes, in contrast to our own independent, tailor-made American girl. The weekly Omaha Bee.
The streets of all nations. Shooting the chutes. The German village. The old plantation. And a miniature railway. These were just a few of the many attractions awaiting visitors on the Midway. While the Grand Court had its classically styled buildings, the Midway was a potpourri of ethnological exhibits, sideshows, restaurants, beer halls, and amusements. Located just north of the Bluff Tract, it offered the visitor a unique experience.
By 1898, it was clear to anyone hoping to organize a World's Fair that it wouldn't fly without a Midway. The Midway Plaisance at the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition had been the hit of the fair. By the time you arrive in 1898 in Omaha, a public had come to expect a Midway at a World's Fair, a Midway that would, and this is so important, educate and entertain.
The Midway was the place of some of the newest wonders of the day. Infant incubators and Röntgen's wonderful ray of light, better known today as the X-ray. Its giant seesaw lifted visitors 200 feet in the air and was the scene of several weddings. In response to the war in Cuba, one entrepreneur put on daily recreations of the battleship Maine being blown up in Havana Harbor, while Thomas Edison's electrical productions featured motion pictures of the war in Cuba. Chiquita was billed as the living doll. She was 26 inches tall and was said to put on an elaborate stage show.
The fair, in a way, is a kind of concentration of urban experiences. And people go to a city for various reasons, and the fair offers the opportunity, after you've improved yourself, after you've worked looking and learning, to relax and have the kind of rather sensational entertainment that in a way you deserve.
Mother and I went out to the expo yesterday. It fills me with disgust to see how people will, for the sake of making a few dollars, cater to the lowest impulses of men. Semi-nude dancing girls just imported from Paris, giving exhibitions where women and children are requested to leave before the end of the performance. It is pitiful. Louise Hosp Armstrong.
Ethnological attractions were an important part of the Midway. They reflected common attitudes of the day and attracted visitors by the thousands.
At the passing show, Cairo's streets and Moorish villages, southern darkies with their cakewalks, songs, and varied old-time plantation activities, Chinese, Japanese, and other Eastern peoples, examples of all these will help the Caucasian to a clearer understanding of the many races and civilizations besides his own. Henry Lanier.
Midway served as a counterpoint to the view of civilization put on display at World's Fairs in the late 19th century. Along the Midway, you saw displays of many different cultures, some of which were deemed primitive or savage. The World's Fairs suggested, at least in part, that the United States could take the lead in civilizing the rest of the world.
This grand ethnological exhibit undoubtedly would be the last gathering of these tribes before the bronze sons of the forests and plains who had resisted the encroachments of the white man are gathered to the happy hunting ground. Edward Rosewater.
Located north of the Midway was the Indian Congress. It was proposed by Edward Rosewater, editor of the Omaha Bee newspaper and Exposition board member. With the fair's emphasis on the West, an Indian Congress seemed a logical part of the fair. Funds were requested from the Bureau of American Ethnology, a part of the Smithsonian. The Congress was to be under the direction of Smithsonian ethnologist James Mooney and Army Captain William Mercer.
First of all, the Indian Congress gave the opportunity to show the triumph of American civilization over a savage, in quotes, race. At the same time, it offered opportunities to show that Americans, by virtue of having conquered the Indians, were perfectly experienced and poised to assume the role of civilizing people elsewhere in the world, most notably in the context of 1898 in the Philippines.
Exposition promoters hoped to have the Congress open in June, but due to the Spanish-American War, government funds were not appropriated until the middle of summer. When the Indians finally did arrive on August 4th, they numbered over 500, representing over 25 tribes. They included Apache, Blackfeet, Cheyenne, Chippewa, Crow, Omaha, Ponca, Pueblo, and Sioux.
It reflected this advancement of civilization. And so Indian people were on exhibit because the Congress, yes, the Congress was a fine idea, but, you know, it was also an exhibit. You know, it was an exhibit of what America the Great had done.
The Indian Congress is undoubtedly the strongest, most original, and most interesting feature of the exposition. It is the last opportunity of seeing the American Indian as a savage, for the government work now in progress will lift the savage Indian into American citizenship before this generation passes into history. Harper's Weekly.
The American government believed that they could civilize Indians and that they could bring them into society, and therefore they saw the Indian Congress as a way of showing what they had done for the Indians and what they were doing to civilize them.
Omaha photographer Frank Reinhardt and his assistant Adolph Muir became known for their images of the Indian Congress.
He wanted to portray Indians in a certain way, you know, first because of Mooney's requirements, and then secondly because of his own understanding of what you know, what the public might want. And then I think overall is what the United States as an industrial developing countries had arrived at, really needing an image such as the vanishing American.
Muir poses his subjects as romantic pieces, as people that have a pictorial quality about them. The photographs are beautiful. They're works of art. You can see in those photographs the change in the national attitude towards the American Indian, one where they're no longer a threat and therefore they become a symbol of that pure American West that was.
In its display of science and art, of invention, machinery, and product, the Exposition stood for the bounding present. In the contrast was the Indian, in his skin lodge, clad in primitive dress, and typical of a diminishing race. George Bird Grinnell.
While originally established as a display of their customs, it quickly turned into a staging ground for sham battles. A grandstand was erected that could hold 5,000 people. Mooney became frustrated.
It didn't take long before this great ethno fair descended itself into the finest tradition of Wild West shows. Remember that the Wild West show is now about 15 years old and is a very popular activity. And so very quickly, this highfalutin ethno fair descends itself into the worst of Wild West shows with twice daily sham battles and whooping and war paint.
It rapidly degenerated into a Wild West show with the sole purpose of increasing gate receipts. The only gain to ethnology will be to get a few pictures to purchase some collections. In this place, an ethnologist's time is wasted and his labor lost. James Mooney.
On August 31st, Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West show were honored at the Exposition. Over 22,000 people attended the celebration. It featured a grand ethnological parade that included members of the Indian Congress. Of all the Indians at the Exposition, perhaps none was as well known as the Apache chief Geronimo. While at the fair, he granted an interview to a local newspaper reporter.
I am an old man, and I want to see my people learn the ways of the whites. I want to see them raise corn and cattle and live in houses. And I believe that the president and the big man at Washington will help my people if they will try to help themselves. Geronimo.
You know where this is going to play. If you're going to grant an interview, are you going to simply thumb your nose and actually cause yourself harm when you get back home? Is Geronimo becoming the poster boy for reservation life? I kind of doubt it. I think what he's doing is expressing a political sentiment that'll play well in Washington.
Indian congresses would play an important role in the later American expositions. Some of the participants in 1898 were on display in 1901 in Buffalo and 1904 in St. Louis. Reinhardt would publish several volumes of his Indian photographs that were sold nationwide.
With the coming of peace, the financial success of the Exposition is assured. The Exposition will get more space in the press and will be more talked of, both home and abroad. The declaration of peace ought to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Exposition. John Wakefield.
By August 12th, the war in Cuba was over. On August 13th, Manila was taken by American forces. Exposition officials planned a national celebration that would allow the fair to culminate in a grand way. It would be called Peace Jubilee Week. Special events included Governor's Day, Army and Navy Day, and Children's Day. Over 900,000 people attended the fair in October, 1/3 of the total attendance of the Exposition. The highlight of Peace Jubilee Week was President's Day and the arrival of President William McKinley.
The people have just literally been pouring into Omaha today. This is Missouri Day, but they are coming from all directions to see the president, who is coming tomorrow evening. Omaha is full of rooms, but they're most all full. There are signs downtown, no rooms for rent. By tomorrow night, the town will be choked with people. Louise Hosp Armstrong.
On October 12th, President's Day, nearly 100,000 people jammed the fairgrounds, the largest number of people to attend the Trans-Mississippi on a single day.
One of the great laws of life is progress, and nowhere have the principles of this law been so strikingly illustrated as in the United States. A century and a decade of our national life have turned doubt into conviction and won new triumphs which have challenged the attention of the world. President William McKinley.
McKinley's presence made the fair complete. It was the, if you will, the final statement of the nationalizing importance of this exposition. This fair had true national significance, as evidenced by McKinley's silhouette there, towering above the exposition.
By the closing of the Trans-Mississippi on October 31st, 1898, over 2.6 million people attended the 5-month event. For the Exposition Board and its investors, it was a success. In an era when many fairs lost money, the Trans-Mississippi returned over 90% of the initial investments to stockholders.
The Omaha Fair represented both the past and the future. It looked back to the frontier days, it celebrated Buffalo Bill, and yet at the same time, it was looking toward the technological future, toward the world where Omaha would be a great railway center, a great city of the size of Chicago, they felt, a city which would be the gateway to the West.
Yet before the Trans-Mississippi Exposition closed its gates, a new group of investors would come forth and propose to reopen the fair in 1899.
We celebrate today its closing scene. The Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition can never be repeated. And while I bid Godspeed to any new company of enterprising men who under some other name or title may bring new features here next year, I sincerely hope that the luster of our assured success will not be dimmed by any less important and successful subsequent event. Gurdon Wattles.
Since the war was a detriment to the Exposition of 1898, Omaha believes it is in a position to present to the American people the first exhibition of the fruits of that war. No other American city can get ready to present a great exhibit inside of 2 years. Hence, Omaha will be the first American city to exploit the wonders of the colonial possessions. The Greater America Exposition Prospectus.
The grounds of the Trans-Mississippi Exposition were sold for $17,000 to a group of investors led by local hotel, restaurant, and saloon interests. It would become the Greater America Exposition and opened on July 1st, 1899. With nationwide interest in the war and the exposition grounds ready for use, it seemed like a sure success.
There were different expectations. I mean, first of all, there wasn't supposed to be a second fair. That was an afterthought. And I think there's pretty good evidence to suggest that the reason that afterthought came along was that the fair was a cash cow who was not yet done giving milk. So I think what you see in the second fair is, first of all, a change in theme to appeal to a new demand so that you keep your attendance up, even though it didn't necessarily succeed. And then you run it into the ground.
Since the end of the Spanish-American War, America had taken control of the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, and Cuba. Exposition officials wanted to feature the new colonial empire. A large Philippine village was constructed, although the continuing conflict in the Philippines delayed the opening until August.
Now, the fair that followed in 1899 was certainly an effort to extend the meaning of Trans-Mississippi. It no longer meant simply the Trans-Mississippi West, bounded probably by the western edge of what had been the Louisiana Purchase. The Greater America Exposition meant a Greater America, and that Greater America now extended its reach, certainly into the Far East.
Exposition promoters added gardens and landscaping to the Grand Court, along with extra lighting. A smaller Indian Congress returned. Chief Red Cloud attended, and Reinhardt took his pictures, but attendance paled compared to the year before. Once the fair closed in November, investors looked for a way to recoup their losses. The entire grounds were sold to the Chicago House Wrecking Company for $50,000. Each building was dismantled, turned into salvage, and sold. The lagoon was filled in. A small park was created, and the rest filled with homes. Two years later, the next American Fair was held in Buffalo, New York. Titled the Pan American Exposition, it highlighted America's newest possessions. It was here, tragically, that President William McKinley was assassinated while attending the fair. In 1904, the Louisiana Purchase Exposition opened in St. Louis. It was the largest exposition the country had seen and attracted nearly 20 million visitors. After the opening of the World's Fair in Buffalo, Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition architect Thomas Kimball presented his ideas on the nature of World's Fairs.
Let us try to avoid subscriptions offered with the condition that something permanent shall be built, something to endure for all time, to remember the exposition by. Why spoil the mental picture? Certainly no reality can compare with the vision our minds will preserve of these passing splendors. Thomas Kimball.
I think that definitely the fair gives us a feeling for life in 1898 or whatever time a particular fair happened. It also gives us a concept of the aspirations of the people as they display these material objects, these artistic objects that is suggestive of not only where their civilization is and their lifestyle is, but it also suggests the path along which they wish to progress.
The fairs were organized with a view towards shaping, towards molding the way people understood the world and the way people thought about the American nation and the way they thought of themselves operating within this nation. The fairs required a lot of investment, and that investment went towards the purpose of instructing people about how to think about the world. They were shapers, not mere reflectors.
Why should we look at the World Fair today? It's a kind of a snapshot of the unconscious life of the time. It shows us what they loved and what they feared. It shows us what they desired and what they thought the future might be. It tells us who their heroes were, and it certainly shows us what they thought was fun.
To this city, this exposition has been like a rain in a drought. It has put new life and energy in all our business interests, to the values of our real estate. It has brought a new and life-giving influence. Gurdon Wattles.
Westward the Empire has been made possible with major funding from the Gilbert M. and Martha H. Hitchcock Foundation, with support from First National Bank of Omaha, Intercom Corporation, and the Trans-Mississippi Exposition Centennial Celebration, and additional support from the Alan and Marcia Baer Family Charitable Trust, the Ada and Leon Millard Foundation, the Cooper Foundation, Werner Enterprises, the Architectural Foundation of Nebraska, and the AIA College of Fellows. Call 1-800-227-5281 to order your copy of Westward the Empire, Omaha's World Fair of 1898. $29.95 plus shipping and handling, Visa and MasterCard accepted. Call 1-800-227-5281 to place your order.